Crusack is a College of Charleston alumna and an award-winning national board-certified teacher who's educated and advocated for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities for more than 30 years. In 2010, she created the REACH program on a foundation of inclusion and self-determination and shares her knowledge of best practices as a conference keynote speaker and consultant for universities developing post-secondary programs.
How did you decide to get into this field of special education, resources, disabilities, and so forth?
Well, I really don't have a great answer for that because I don't think it was a conscious choice of this is going to be my field.
Okay.
I was in high school and there was a flyer on the wall looking for people to work at a summer camp for children that had disabilities. And it was $100 for 3 weeks in the South Carolina July summer. I was like, I don't care, $100 is $1 million.
Yeah, it's not bad.
And at that point, I had no interaction with anybody with a disability. So I had no preconceived notions. I had no ideas of what I thought I knew or didn't know. I was just like, hey, I'm 14 and I can earn $100. So I started working at the camp. And I started doing the camp when I was 14 and I did it until I graduated from high school. And then in college, I did respite care for families that had a family member with a disability that needed some sort of support. And the whole time I was going through college, I was trying to figure out what do I want to major in. I just wanted to move to New York City and be a magazine editor, forgetting that I don't like to write. So I don't know why I chose that. But the whole time I kept working with people that had disabilities. And I could never understand why was there such a challenge to find people to work with students with disabilities? Why aren't they present in my everyday life? But this wasn't something that I really had thought of as a career path. But then my life just sort of went in that direction, more trying to understand why is there segregation and isolation of people with disabilities. And then I ended up majoring in special education. And then I was in the classroom teaching for 21 years before I started the REACH program. And the entire 21 years in different public schools in both New Jersey and South Carolina still haven't figured out why there's a separation between traditional learners and students with disabilities. So that sort of placed me on this path of inclusion because I was trying to find where's the good answer for why we're isolating a sector of our population, and I haven't found it yet. So
yeah. And so I love to ask this question because sometimes people do have a connection, but has there been any, and there's all different types, learning, there could be auditory, there can be a wide range of disabilities, but do you have any personal connection, whether it be family or I guess just friends that are like affected with some type of difference, I should say, that has enhanced your profession even more? Or been
Sure. After being, in the field for so long, you start to develop relationships with people, right. And you just over time, people have been born into my family that had some sort of issue happen at birth or prior to birth, or there's those disabilities that I was never aware of because they're not visual.
Right, of course.
I grew up under the poverty line, and as a white person, I was a minority in my neighborhood. So I grew up not necessarily aware that you just don't take people for who they are. So I've never looked at race different, ability level different. People are just people. So I think I was a little bit blind to trying to seek out where is this, disability in my own life and my own family until I went to school and I was really learning, the details of all of it. Yeah. But just progressing in the field within a profession, you develop relationships with people. And it's very interesting that because I've been in this profession for so long, there's an assumption that I know every person that has a disability. So people are literally directed towards me saying, oh, you must know so-and-so because they have a child with a disability or they have a sibling with a disability. So it's sort of opened my network of people, because there's this assumption that I either know everyone or I should know everyone. So there's a lot of different relationships in my life. And I think every person that I meet or everybody that shares their story of disability just opens a different avenue of perception because everybody with a disability is different. There's, they may have that commonality of having a disability, but the experience, the people, the personalities, all of that continues to just be different. So the more people you meet, the more perception you have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And invisible disabilities are certainly just one that, I mean, a lot of people can't recognize, unless it's obviously unless it's visible, quote unquote, like whether it be their behaviors, like I'm talking about autism or, multiple sclerosis. I mean, it shows, but it's not something that's like physical, or obviously then learning disabilities and so forth. So.
Right.
Anyways, now we're going to get into your into the REACH program. So the REACH program at the College of Charleston has been nationally recognized for its commitment to full inclusion and self-determination. So how and why did you create this program?
So the College of Charleston received a grant, a 3-year grant to start a program for students with intellectual disabilities. The president of the college at the time, George Benson, recognized that disability was an avenue of diversity that we had not addressed. So the college received a grant, and I, at the time, was teaching public school, telling my students, if I could make it possible for you to go to college, I would. But, they didn't have high school diplomas, they didn't have the credentials that they needed to be admitted into college. So I would always say, I'm so sorry, but there's nothing that I can do. And the students would say, why did you make me work so hard when it didn't matter anyway?
Right.
I'm not getting a degree. It doesn't, none of this matters. And so I had a few former parents and a few former students come to me and say, you have to apply for this, to run this program, to create this program at the College of Charleston. But I was quite happy in my classroom and I had no desire to leave because I really loved what I did. But it was a former student who said, you promised if you could ever do anything to make it possible for me to go to college, you would. And so I couldn't go back on my word. So I reached out to the college. I applied for the position. I really think I got the position because I think I confused them with my questions, because I was like, how are you going to do this inclusively? And how are you going to do this inclusively? And you can't do that because that would be no segregation. So I was lucky enough to get the job, and really they said, do whatever you need to do to set up this program. You have 3 years. And so I looked at what I always did with traditional students is I always started with a traditional student schedule. So at the college, I had to figure out what is the traditional student experience here. Always start with that and add in the special support as it's needed. So I had to figure out, what does academic advising do? What does disability services that's already here do? How do I include students in residence life? How do I include students in classes so that it's all educationally valuable? I do not believe in inclusion for inclusion's sake, where we have someone sitting there, aren't we great? That doesn't change that person's future. So I had to figure out how to do this as inclusively as possible, making it educationally valuable to the students and worth their time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. And it's a great program. And now, there's just so much, and there's, so much development, and it's definitely something to be proud of, as I'm sure you are.
Yeah. Well, what we do is we look at the outcome measurements of the program. So I started the program in March and I had students in August. So it was very, very quick.
Wow.
I only had this grant for a couple of years. So I was literally a semester ahead of the students as I was developing the program. And then once they graduated, I was able to get feedback from them about, as you're approaching life as an independent, self-determined adult, what do you wish you knew more of? And so being very reflective in that practice, I've continued to grow and enhance the program. And we're at a great place. We have 90% of our alumni have full-time living wage jobs.
Amazing.
Compared to the 16% of people with intellectual disabilities in general society having employment.
It's great. It's really great. So what are your current short-term goals of this program? Obviously, there's been so much, and, you talk about employment and, some of your students now having that, and, talking about minimum wage and so forth. But what are your future, I guess, short-term goals?
So short-term goals, we always want to be reflective in what we do as a program. And so we figured out this great system that works. So we have huge employment rates, and we also have a huge independent living rate for our students. We have 75% independent living rate for our alumni. So we don't want to mess with those numbers. But we always have to be reflective and see where else can we help them grow to be independent, free thinking adults on their own. And one of the things that I've learned that I need to do is have a parent education that sort of coincides with the students' education, because these students have been so incredibly supported by their families, but they are away at college and their parents are not watching that growth. It happens while they're away at school. So when the students are going home, sometimes it's really difficult for the parents to see, you do now have the skills and capability to be independent in this area of your life. So it's sort of this difficult spot for parents to be in, to sort of trust that we said they're independent and trust the student and say, yeah, I can do this by myself. But the parents, lifetime experiences, I've had to provide support for you to make sure that you're okay. So one of the short-term goals is to create this parallel parent education so that the parents have an understanding of what the student is learning, have an understanding of what we're saying when we're saying we're teaching the students to be self-determined, and how to act as a supporter instead of someone who's just really dictating the life choices because they feel that's what's best. So I think parents absolutely have the best intentions for their student always, but sometimes I think it's really hard to let go and let the student be independent, because that growth is happening elsewhere. So that's one of our short-term goals. And we always want to look at this isn't as flashy, but we always want to look at the structure of the program internally, because what are we doing as a program that someone else on that campus is already doing? So if we admit our students to traditional classes in a certain way, and the registrar's office registers everyone else's class, why aren't they registering our students as well? So we want to take the process and make the process inclusive as well. So we want to be in a position where we as a program are almost not needed for those sorts of things, because the university has such ownership of the program.
Right. No, for sure. And so what are some questions that one should ask in order to evaluate one's ability of their emotional and, social aspects of, their life, in order to really, I kind of get a sense of to get a sense about their disability and their ability for the future and working.
Well, first of all, I believe it's very important for students to, first of all, know that they have a disability, and secondly, to understand it. You would probably be surprised at the amount of students that come to the REACH program and do not know that they have a disability or what their disability is when they get there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but
No, I was just going to say, it's very funny because I have a friend, he's one of my best friends. I met him at Wheaton. We're friends to this day. Yeah, like I said, he's one of my best friends. He has dysgraphia, so it's a learning disability, but it's so funny because I'm so well versed in just knowing about everything and neuropsych evals and whatnot. And he showed me his neuropsych eval because he needed something and whatever was helping him. And I went through it and was like, do you know that you have Tourette syndrome? And he was like, wait, what? And then it kind of like flashed back to him. So he was like, yeah, I don't know. So that's just one example.
Yeah, and it's so true. It's like it's a secret that needs to be kept or something. And I sort of want to shift that whole idea that you have a disability that's a hidden little secret. It's not. It just is. It's like you're right-handed or left-handed. It's just
right.
So I think it's important for people to understand their disability and how they learn and process information. I've made that part of the REACH program. We teach the students what their disability is. It's not the concentration of what we do, but it's important to have an understanding of how you learn, how you express information, and how you can ask for assistance when you need it without having to download your entire life story. You don't need to say, well, I have this disorder and I can't do this and I can't do that, if you literally just need someone to open a door for you, So trying to figure out how do you navigate this world, it really matters that you know yourself really well. And we do things just like a sensory processing profile, so students understand, if you have a hard time receiving information when there's a lot of background noise, well, then you can say to people, it's hard for me to hear you in here, it's really loud, let's go outside and then I can hear you better. Or if you really have a hard time paying attention unless you take notes, just learn to say, hey, do you mind if I take a couple of notes while you're talking? And just learn that everyday language so that you're able to speak to your disability and that you understand yourself. I also really encourage families to get over saying you can do anything as long as you work hard enough.
A lot of people say that.
People say it all the time. And I always say, I don't see me playing in the NFL. No matter how hard I work, I don't think I have the basic skills necessary to play in the NFL. It's like trying to tell somebody who's 4'11", you can be a professional basketball player. You can't, and that's okay. I can also not be a brain surgeon because if I see blood, I might pass out. So everybody's meant to do different things and people have different skill sets, but I think it puts people in a bad spot who are working as hard as they can with their disability, who aren't able to earn a bachelor's degree because of that disability. Are we saying you're not working hard enough? If your whole life you've always heard, if you just work hard enough, you'll be able to do anything.
Right.
That's not really a true statement for any of us.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's interesting because as much as I preach that, you can be able to a certain degree, even if you have some type of disability, it does draw a fine line because there are unfortunately people that are extremely impaired that can't speak, that, whatever, they need help talking, like, if people have severe spinal cord injuries, brain damage and whatnot, and their progress doesn't allow them to, I know somebody, my cousin's daughter has FOXG1, doesn't allow them to really be able to do anything for their lives. And yes, they can maybe make a little bit of progress, speak a little bit better, like, whatever, even if it's just some more babbling, or just small words. But it draws a fine line because like they're not going to be like other people that have disabilities. And so, that quote, oh yeah, if you put your mind to it or whatever it is and you can do it, doesn't apply to them. And that's, I think that's very tricky when you think about inclusion and disabilities, because there is that small percentage.
Right. And things are what they are, and so if you don't have a way to speak, being a public speaker is probably not for you, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you can't be an amazing speaker, or you can't be an amazing something else. So I think we need to stop telling people that, you absolutely can work hard and you can absolutely be successful. If you work hard enough, you will be successful. Works.
No, and that's totally true. Yeah, I mean, you have to put your mind to it. You have to have, determination and perseverance and bravery, which, clearly I've had that, but, it's hard. I mean, you really need to like kind of strap your boots in or whatever, they say, to get where you want to get to. And it's not always easy. So,
harder than some other people. A lot of students in the REACH program really struggle with the idea that they're working so much harder than some traditional students, and those traditional students get bachelor's degree and the students in the REACH program get certificates, and it's not fair. But how strong and how brave do you have to be to continue, because at the end of the day, I'm gonna have a career, I'm gonna have a life. So there's a lot of
for sure. Absolutely. So when identifying a college, and, just,
figuring out if a college candidate is self-sufficient. Usually soft skills are one of the main components of the decision for people with differences. What are soft skills, and why are they important? How can one be taught these skills?
Okay, soft skills are those skills that you need to just manage life, like communication,
Okay.
self-control, all of those things that in order to be a functioning person within society, you need to have in interacting. The term soft skill is often used with employment, so that's a good example. So if you are working as a teacher, you need to make lesson plans, you need to instruct your students. But the soft skills would be you arrive at work on time, you're dressed appropriately, you're cordial to your coworkers, you're cordial to your students. If you're mad, sad, depressed, none of your students know that because you're regulating your emotions. So all of those soft skills, they are important to managing life. And I think one of the most important things that I've seen within the K through 12 environment in college is that a lot of students with disabilities, for some reason, are almost held exempt to those sorts of behaviors. And people will say, oh, they have a disability, it's okay. You're not going to learn the behaviors if you're not taught them. So I've seen students with disabilities who are 8 years old want a toy, so they throw a fit and they get the toy, like screaming and yelling, give me a toy. But their sibling who's the same age, they're like, no, you will go to timeout and learn that you need to use your words. That's not how. And they're like, well, this student has a disability, so just give it to them. And that takes away the opportunity for the student, or the child in that case, to learn soft skills. But I think there's a double standard within society that, oh, that person has a disability. So there's this huge assumption that they can't learn, or that they shouldn't learn, or they shouldn't be held to societal standards, but they can learn. It might take longer, they may need to be taught in a different way, but it is absolutely possible. And soft skills,
I totally agree. Yeah,
soft skills are 100% required to have long-lasting reciprocal friendships and relationships.
right, absolutely. And I guess you can consider these soft skills a little bit of like basic skills. So, because it's funny, because I've actually never heard of that term soft skills. But if I put into perspective, I think it's a great term. But if I put it into perspective of like basic skills, it's kind of like a no-brainer, because how are you gonna, if you're at baseline, how are you gonna, kind of move forward if you don't have these quote unquote soft skills?
Right. And it's something that parents can teach students, especially as they're getting older and starting to look at leaving home. So, the kids could start waking up to the alarm clock on their own, get up on their own, pick out their clothes on their own. If they're angry about something, how do you handle that instead of just, slamming a door or something, how do you handle those? And provide opportunities for students to work through those on their own with coaching, so that they learn people aren't talking to you because you didn't get your way and you started screaming, or you're always an hour late, so people aren't going to invite you anymore. So there's always opportunities just in day-to-day life to learn those sorts of skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So out of pragmatic language, social, organizational, vocational, and travel skills, which one do you think is the most important for the success of independence?
Oh gosh, those are all so important. Well, what I do is I look at all those sorts of skills and sort of figure out, where are your strengths already? We're going to start there, and that's going to be the basis for learning everything else. Pragmatic language is really important for employment, for relationships, but for completing all of that other stuff, pragmatic language is always important. So that's tied into everything. They're all sort of intertwined there, I would say the least important for people that are still in high school is transportation, because as long as you're living with the family, there's some sort of supports there that could sort of talk you through that. But once you're out on your own, transportation becomes very important. It is a key piece of what we do at the REACH program, but they are definitely intertwined. So I would definitely, that's such a great list that you came up with, by the way. But I would definitely
My
recommend.
team came up with it, so don't think I'm like writing every single question, because I definitely, yeah, quote unquote, sometimes need a little bit of assistance. But yeah, no, the person who does it, she's amazing with the.
Yeah, well, it's a great.
I think it's a great question too.
Yeah, it really is. They're all very, very important. I think language would probably be the top of the list, and knowing that people communicate in different ways. So even if it's not spoken language, some way to communicate is probably key. And if that's a skill that you're learning, sort of what language do you use in those situations so that people know that you're thinking and processing and not just being silent. I've seen a lot where people with disabilities lose their voice because they are processing and whoever they're talking to starts answering the question for them because they're taking too long to process what the question was. So when you're in a conversation, if someone needs to pause 5 or 10 seconds before they answer to process that language, that's a long time during a conversation. It doesn't sound like a long time, but it is if you're just sitting there. So language is definitely on a good contender for first on the list, but they are all very important. They're all very intertwined. Starting with the language, if you have the skills to say, I need assistance with my organization, that's very helpful, or I need assistance with my transportation. I very much believe in self-determination and people being able to have the lives that they want. And programs like REACH are evaluated on our employment outcomes. And one of the things that I've always struggled with is what if it's someone's choice to not work? Because some people don't. And that's fine. Are you a failure because you don't work?
Yeah, or they didn't go to college, regardless,
Right. So that's a self-determined choice in a lot of cases. So I think having a voice and being able to communicate is key and a really important piece of what we do.
Yeah, no, they're all intertwined. I mean, it's kind of crazy how you think about it, but they, one skill is just as important as another skill, and it all works both ways. So a lot of different aspects in order to manage life and do things, quote unquote. So academically.
And I think that's one reason why the students in the REACH program are so successful when they enter the world, because we teach all of these simultaneously. So we are teaching people how to access mass transportation while we're teaching them how to organize their schedule, while we're teaching them how to communicate with the world. So I think that's one reason why our alumni are so successful, because we only have them for 4 years, which sounds like a lot of time, but it's not, because it's like 4 months, then a break, then 4 months, and then a break. So to teach them as much as we can in real time when they're living those experiences, I think is important too. And I think it's important to teach those sorts of skills in real time. So I don't think it's a good idea to have a class about how we're going to organize. I think it's important to organize your life as you're living it, so that importance is there and it's relevant to you as a learner.
For sure. So many parents, guardians, caretakers are surprised with the fact that there are no individualized education plans or IEPs or focused specialized education courses for those with differences in the college environment. And some of this relates into the sense of like why I had trouble with my graduate program. But anyways, they do not always realize that IUPs are very important, and they don't understand the ADA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Act. What are some tools, methods, educational resources that can help these people guide them through this quote unquote like stage of transition from high school to college?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially now. I think we have a really unique opportunity to keep adding disability to diversity. So now that everyone's talking about being more inclusive of diversity, I think it's important to say disability is an avenue of diversity. And I think we've been left out a little bit. I think it's important to recognize that people of color have different needs, people of gender have different needs, people with disabilities may have different needs as well. So we need to be included in that. And I think one of the issues at the university level is there's not an understanding of disability. And a lot of people, I've trained over 300 professors at the College of Charleston and countless staff members.
Mhm.
And generally, I'm finding that people's understanding of disability is whatever their personal connection to it is. So if they have a neighbor when they were growing up that had a disability, their idea of who the students in the REACH program are is going to be their neighbor from when they're growing up. We had one professor who was very honest, and I always try to create this safe space where people can say, I always say, you can say all of your stuff that might insult me in this space, and it's okay as long as you're trying to get information. I promise not to be insulted. But we had a professor who lived in New York, actually, and there was a man who used to take the subway who, from what he told me, probably had some level of autism. And if the train was late, he would scream and yell and throw his stuff and lay on the ground and scream because the train was late. And so his idea of disability in students in the REACH program was that. So his idea was if he started class late, he would have a student yelling and screaming on the floor and throwing things. And so I had to explain, that's a certain sort of disability. That's a certain, behavior that the person was working with to express themselves. But that's just one disability. And so working with the REACH program, he learned that even within the world of disability, there's a ton of diversity. Everyone is different. So I think one of the issues with university is that people do not have an understanding of what disability means. And I think we're also coming off the 90s and the early 2000s where there was an overdiagnosis of ADHD.
Oh, yeah.
Overdiagnosis of, or too many accommodations made with a little bit of complaining. So now people are going through with true diagnosis that do need accommodations, but these professors are saying, oh yeah, you're just spoiled.
Right.
Everybody just always gave you what you wanted. Well, I'm not going to let you be spoiled, you know? And so sort of shifting that mindset away from, I'm doing you a favor by providing an accommodation to recognizing that this is something that you need to truly learn and express what you've learned. I think in that way, sometimes people who have a physical disability have it a little bit easier than people who have an invisible disability. Because people generally, well, they can't deny a ramp to get into a building. But if you need to take your test orally and you can, read and talk, people are really struggling to think, well, why do you need that? Where you really wouldn't look at somebody who's a wheelchair user and say, oh, why do you need that? So I think there's so many stereotypes still. So the more that we're involved in advocacy work, the more understanding that we can help with, the better. I continue to do trainings on my campus. I've worked with traditional students who are working on diversity projects. Actually, there's a group of students that are creating a module that all freshmen coming to the College of Charleston will take called Understanding Disability. So that there's a new look at disability. And a piece of that is you don't know other people's business. You don't know if they have a disability or not. I love
their business unless they tell you.
Right. I love that you're so open about what your disability is, but the majority of students that we have coming into the REACH program do not want anyone to know. They're so worried about the judgment and just all this baggage that they have from ableism. They don't want people to know. They want to try to hide it. Usually by their sophomore year, they're kind of over it and they're like, I am who I am, and there's a pride at the person that they are. But there's definitely an understanding of disability and what that means on college campuses.
Of course, no, absolutely. It's so interesting because as you were talking, and this is kind of it's a little, I'm just gonna say it's kind of funny, but there are, when you talk about like stereotypes and you talk about people who claim that they have a disorder when they really don't, that comes across in so many ways. I know people like who have medical conditions,
including myself, obviously, who got the vaccine early in the city or New York City because they qualify for it. But then people who don't have a disability were like making up excuses because a lot of places weren't, checking their doctor's notes and, so, but it's very funny because in New York City, if you know about the city system, I went to a private school, but all the private schools, all the students are like, oh, I'm just saying, like more of like, if you think about like the gossipy girl, like type of people, they're like, all right, like it's after school, I got to go see my psychiatrist for my ADD and ADHD medication. I got to go see my therapist to talk about like X, Y, and Z problems that they're having. And it's quite funny, if you think of it in that sense. But I mean, it's sad that they are using it somewhat to their advantage when also there's just so many people who really do have the disorder and really need the help, and they're using, so anyways, I'm a huge advocate for that, and I'm so glad like you guys are too, because like it's, in every city and every place is different. So anyways, so the attitude and self-advocacy skills of a young adult with disabilities may be two of the most important factors for determining their success or failure in post-secondary education. In what ways do students with differences learn or boost their desired levels of self-advocacy to succeed in post-secondary education?
So once they get to the college, that's a big piece that we talk about. And honestly, some of it is just that stage of life. So going away to college for the first time, making decisions for yourself. So we shy away from the language of advocate and we say, speak up for yourself. Mm-hmm. Our students, like I said before, really don't want people to know that they have disabilities when they first get there. So we talk about speaking up for yourself and what you want and having a voice. And we use the word advocacy later on when they have an understanding of what all of that means. But I think in preparing to go to college, one of the things that we look for in our potential students is that they want to go to college and having a voice in that. And it's really amazing the number of students whose parents have applied on their behalf and they don't know that they've been applied.
Oh, wow.
We've had even a student this year at an interview. He said, oh, I just found out this morning I was having an interview. Can you tell me again what this is? So IDEA makes it mandatory that students are involved in their transition planning starting at the age of 14. But students often go to IEP meetings, sign on the line and leave and are not part of the discussion. Mm-hmm. Or there's a conversation that they really don't understand what's going on and their whole role is to just sit there and be quiet. So I'd say having conversations prior to going into IEP meetings, that's what I used to do with my students when I was teaching, is I would say, this is what the meeting is about. Mm-hmm. This is what I'm going to say about you. I'm required by law to say this about you. What do you think? This is what you're supposed to learn next year. Mm-hmm. And they would say, I don't want to learn all of that. I'm like, well, you kind of have to learn stuff, so we can't take it off. But, having those conversations beforehand and making sure that they understand the process. And then outside of that, looking at what the students naturally are interested in or what they have aptitude for. Right. I see a lot of segregation based on leisure activities where students are just going to what's available, not necessarily what they have any sort of interest in. So if you're interested in bowling, you've got it made, because I think bowling's everywhere for people with disabilities. But if you're interested in stand-up comedy, go to a stand-up comedy class.
Right.
You don't have to call beforehand and say, do you take people with disabilities? Go. Participate. If you need help, ask for help. Very rarely are they going to say you're going to need to get out of here, you have a disability, because that's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Of course,
but just really, putting yourself out there and letting people have the opportunity to get to know you, let people know where you need assistance or where you can assist them, and follow what the students are truly interested in and show aptitude for.
Mm-hmm.
At the college, we see students with very limited exposure to work. They're usually working for a family friend or someone in the family, and we're seeing in those jobs there's not a lot of responsibility that is truly work related. So it's fine. I mean, if your family has a big professional network and you have a job, but have something you're supposed to do, besides show up, so you can see what you're good at and what you're not good at. We do internships every semester, and students say, oh, I've wanted to work with children my whole life. So we put them in this internship in a job that they would be qualified for with the credential that they're earning. And then they might come back and say, I really hate children. I don't want to do that. But without that experience,
Right.
How are you supposed to know what your true interests are? How are you supposed to know what you're naturally good at and what you're not good at? You might think you want to be a professional baker, but then you start baking and you're like, this stinks. I
Right.
want to try something else. So anytime students can be exposed to different activities that are traditional activities, they don't necessarily have to be specific to disability. If you're interested in what people with disabilities are doing, go ahead, jump in and do that, but follow your interest. Is a great way to really start developing those skills of determining the sort of life that you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is our last question. This has been wonderful. I can literally talk for hours on this topic. But if you could, what is one piece of advice that you give to young adults, so graduating seniors that are transitioning from high school to the college process, especially those that have learning differences?
Right. I would say it's very important in that transition process to look at the school that you want to go to and make sure, first of all, that they have what you want to study.
Right.
Make sure that every public university has to have a disability services office. So if it's a public university, evaluate what services they offer. And is it going to set you up for success? What do you need to do to be qualified? Try to meet with professors within the major that you want to study and see if they're the sorts of professors that have relationships with students that are willing to provide whatever services that you're going to need.
Right.
I always recommend that people visit the campus of the school that they want to go to, which is true of anybody going to a university. I think you need to have that feeling of I belong here. Before you go to school, I would recommend that for anybody, disability or not. But making sure that you're going to have the supports that you need, especially if you're going to college for the very first time. Because that transition alone is a lot. It is stressful. It is hard. College is hard. It's fun, but it's also really anxiety producing. So make sure that you're setting yourself up for the best possible scenario by making sure that you're going to have the supports that you need.
Amen to that. That was wonderful. This has been so great. You're amazing. And I could talk to you forever. What you're doing is amazing.
Well, thank you.